Hello everyone, welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Don't forget, when we hit 5,000 subscribers, we're not going to only be giving away one jersey, we're going to be giving away 2 jerseys. Yes, that's right, 2 jerseys. So make sure you subscribe so we can hit our goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of July. Now, back to the video. MLS has been getting spanked by Liga MX as long as I've been watching soccer. Even though the gap has closed over the last couple of years and MLS has played in several Concacaf Champions League finals, they've only been able to win this trophy one time in the last 20 years. I brought on Eric Gomez of ESPN Mexico to talk about if the gap is actually closing between both leagues, what does MLS need to do to actually win this tournament more frequently, and what his view is of the tournament going forward. Eric, oh man, this is a tough one, man. I don't think when we talked last time, I could have imagined it being 3-0 Columbus losing to Pachuca, but that's where we're at, man. Pachuca just kind of cleaned their clock, and I was surprised. Were you surprised by the result that we saw last Saturday?
Yeah, honestly, I was. I mean, I think you and I spoke before the game. Obviously, we each of us gave a prediction. I thought, this had 3 goals total, but it was going to be one of those 2-1 games, right? And it was going to be kind of tight till the end. I mean, I would not have been surprised, rather, if this game had gone to penalty kicks. I figured that Columbus's style was a really good match for Pachuca. I didn't expect Pachuca to be as clinical as they were in front of goal. And I think it was just kind of a cavalcade of situations that kind of came together and allowed Pachuca to really, when we look back at it, just kind of have a romp with Columbus in that final. I think, we were all pretty shocked that the game, it was 3-0, easily could have been 4-0, it could have been 5-0, but silver lining, there were a couple of really good plays offensively from Columbus that, had they gone a different way, I think could have changed the makeup of the match as well. So,
yeah, when I was watching the game, when we did the live stream, it looked like Columbus was in the match. Like they were really going for it. Like they had a couple chances to score, like in the first 10 to 15 minutes. And then it's like the whole entire momentum flipped. I can't remember what minute it was that Salomon Rondon had scored his first goal, but I think it was maybe the 20th minute or 25th minute. And I'm not too familiar with him as a player, but obviously looking back, like you said before the show, hindsight 2020, looking back, people were saying that this is a player that's older, past his prime, the guy that's not normally scoring braces in the match. And, he looked like a younger version of himself. Like he had his way with the Columbus Crew, which is a team that's normally organized. Tactics are pretty sharp. And he just absolutely ate them alive and had his way with the Crew. Were you shocked at the performance that he had in this match?
I mean, I'm shocked that a guy that's 36, the way that, Rondon has had such he's 34 actually, but he's still kind of that wily veteran. I had spoken to Herculez Gomez before the Concacaf final as well. We talked a little bit more about him specifically. And, I kind of pinpointed 2 things that I really like about him at this point in his career. I mean, he's clearly not the striker that he was when he was playing in Europe for so many years, but his positioning is fantastic. I mean, he's just so smart off the ball, and he's able to kind of read defenses and find out what certain players are doing to guard him. I mean, they're not going to man mark him, obviously, but, he kind of zeroes in on what defensive lines are doing to kind of keep him contained, and then he just finds another way. And you said 2025th, I think it was like the 12th minute, but it was a really intense.
Maybe it was.
It was a really intense first 10 minutes, right? So that's why the match felt like it had gone on for a little bit longer. I mean, Columbus had a couple of chances within those. I mean, they had a chance 20 seconds into the game, right? And Pachuca just kind of threw a couple of haymakers back at them. Columbus replied, and then Rondon, when he finally scored in the 12th minute, it was all positioning. He was behind the defense, right? So he's a guy that I think is not going to wow anybody with his speed at this point in time. He's not, a player that during the Liga MX season had fancy goals like that chip. But he came to play. I mean, and that's what happens when you have players who have the European experience that a guy like Rondon has. He's able to kind of bring the rest of the team together and say, all right, I've been in 20, 30, 40 of these matches before. And over the course of my career, I know what it takes to win. And I think that's, the leadership aspect, the experience, and obviously, again, the positioning was there for him to take advantage of a young Columbus defense and obviously a team that I think was sort of expecting to be in that game throughout 90 minutes. When they when Rondon scored that first goal, I really did kind of feel the air come out of Columbus's balloon there for the next 10, 15 minutes. And it was really hard for them to recover, at least for the rest of the first half. I saw some life coming back from halftime. And I figured that, again, we could have a more competitive match on our hands, but that just didn't happen.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of like, I'm not trying to make any excuses because Pachuca was the better team that night. There's just no doubt about it. There's the rumors about the diarrhea, which is
Right.
crazy, right? I just think I don't want to use that as an excuse of why a team lost. I mean, that's just that's not the facts. They were a better club. Even the elevation argument, right, going from 200 feet to 8,000 feet in Pachuca, I'm sure that did have an impact, and they were wearing like some type of special mask or breathing machines that were supposedly going to help with the elevation transition. But sometimes you just get your ass beat, Eric. You just lose, man. It just happens that way. And I'd be lying to you if I'd said I didn't feel confident about the Crew, because the Crew is one of the best clubs in MLS, not only roster wise, but coaching wise. They're a very well coached team. And I think they just laid an egg, man. I just think they laid an egg in this particular moment. Pachuca was the better club that night and they lost. And I just kind of like think about what they could have done maybe differently to get a different result. And we had talked a little bit about this before the show. You had said you'd read on Twitter about spending, right?
Right.
And how Pachuca is not a spending club. I think their salary budget, it's like, what, $8 million, if that. I don't even know if it's that high, but they're mostly academy-driven team, right? They're developing most of their players.
Right.
I really don't know what MLS could do to get a different result. I just think they just got outclassed in this match. I just think the Pachuca was the better team, and we've seen other performances where MLS clubs were close to winning the match.
I think the elevation thing and anything else, kind of a difficult thing for teams to come in. That I've heard different arguments as far as you want to play within the first 24 hours that you're there, because some teams have other times you have the ability to at least a week in the place that you're going to before, in order to acclimate, then do that. Columbus got caught in the middle. I mean, they were there for, I think, 48 hours before the game. I think they might have arrived Thursday morning. The game was obviously Saturday night. And, we've seen that in other sports. In the NBA, the last couple of seasons, it's been just incredibly difficult for teams to go to Denver and play at a same level throughout 48 minutes, because eventually it's going to wear on you. And I saw that from Columbus in Pachuca. Like the first 10 minutes of the game, we talked about it just now, those were arguably Columbus's best moments throughout the entire final. They looked crisp. They looked sharp in front of goal. They put Pachuca in a bind a couple of times at least. Again, unfortunately, the ball didn't go into the net for them. But, as you sort of move on within that match, especially, the psychological burden of being down 1-0 and then 2-0 in the first half, and your legs are getting tired, it's getting harder to breathe. That's not nothing, and I dare anybody to say, because you could talk about 10 different things that went wrong for Columbus during that game, but it is still so hard for anybody who is not used to higher elevation to go into a spot like Pachuca, like Mexico City, other cities in central Mexico, and try and get a result. So, moving forward for MLS teams, you talked about the spending. Yeah, that's really important as well. But Columbus beat Tigres. Columbus beat Monterrey. Those teams spend twice as much, 3 times as much money as they do. And then you face a team like Pachuca that's, kind of at your level in terms of spending, and then you lose 3-0. I mean, make it make sense, right? I think it's just one of those things where this is, you and I talked about this last week. It's growing pains. You're going to go through these types of instances in which 9 times out of 10, you're putting up a very different result than losing 3-0, right? So it was just bad luck. It was a combination of factors. I think that Cucho Hernandez, he's better than that in terms of, blaming what happened with food poisoning and whatever. It's just very difficult to kind of go back to that and say, hey, man, I don't think it was a coincidence that 20 of us were sick. If you got to choose your words carefully, because he said that in Spanish. I mean, I understand that just as well as I would if he would have said it in English. And the way that he said it was a little kind of conspiracy theory-ish. Like, it's no coincidence, man. I mean, what are you implying? It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, no, it is. No, it is. And yeah, man, Columbus might have won this game, 7 out of 10 times, but they didn't the time it mattered most, right? And that's just the way it is. Not always the best team doesn't always win every match. And Pachuca, like, you just got to give them their flowers for what they did. They had a tough path, just like Columbus did, to get to this final. And the one thing I will say, Eric, is even if MLS didn't win this the Concacaf Champions Cup, right? You brought up a good point. The teams they took out to get to the final, Monterrey, Tigres, teams they beat on the road, which MLS teams never do, like you said, because of the elevation or just the atmosphere, or they've had a barrier where they always struggle to win on the road. They did win on the road this time. Monterrey, I think they was it 2-0 or 3-0? They beat them at Monterrey. It was a bloodbath. They beat Monterrey pretty handedly. The Crew did. So even if they're not lifting this trophy, right? I think if we're all being fair-minded, these leagues are close because the Columbus Crew were the second best team in this tournament. They came in second place, and they didn't have a cupcake walk to get there. They had to beat some very good clubs to make it to the final.
Yeah, and if we're recording this 6 weeks ago, before that, even the quarterfinals went out, so maybe a couple months ago, it didn't look good for MLS in general. I mean, you remember that. I mean, it was just such a difficult road for a lot of these MLS teams. I mean, New England just got absolutely blown off the map by Club America. Monterrey, Tigres, they did their thing. You had teams like Pachuca who were obviously progressing quite well. And it didn't look good anywhere you looked. To have one MLS team carry the flag for the entire league the way that Columbus did was just absolutely huge because – in my mind, it speaks more to what Columbus is doing right within the confines of MLS than, anything else that's going on within the league. You're going to have success with teams that are built the way that Inter Miami is because there's just too much talent on that roster. The LA Galaxy have done that in the past. LAFC have done that in the past. But, again, we look at the only MLS team to have won CONCACAF in the last 20 years, and that is the 2022 Seattle Sounders. They are a team that was built much more, in the image of the 2024 Columbus Crew than, say, Inter Miami or your classic LA Galaxy teams or LAFC teams. Winning on the road is a big thing too, and that's something that you need to do in these competitions in order to survive. LAFC a couple of years ago, they had a similar road. And they just faced a really good Tigres team as well in the final, and we're not able to kind of get over that hump. But I remember them knocking off Liga MX teams on the road, and I know that it was a little bit post-COVID. There were seating restrictions and all that, but it's still just so hard for any of these teams. I mean, look, you want to flip the coin and say, Liga MX teams, how did they do in Leagues Cup last year when every single game was a quote, visiting match? I mean, they didn't do well, obviously. And Monterrey was the one team, again, similar to Columbus this year with the CONCACAF, that kind of carried the flag for that league until they were not able to get past the semifinal round. So to me, again, I'll go back to that term, growing pains. You're going to have growing pains. You're going to have teams that maybe should do better in this competition fail to take that final step. But if you'll recall, you and I spoke about this. You said MLS is going to get to a point where it's going to dominate Liga MX, and that's great. But you still need to kind of have that sort of progressive climb. And I think that MLS needs to focus more or less on, if 10 years from now, Liga MX and MLS are trading off CONCACAF wins, that's a huge deal. That's just a huge win for MLS, and it means that the league has grown beyond its means and beyond the confines of 2024, right? So, again, hats off to Pachuca, as you said. They had a fantastic tournament. They're also very well coached. But I'm excited about the model, the blueprint that this Columbus Crew kind of team laid out for the rest of MLS.
Exactly. And, as long as we have been watching this tournament, right, there was a point in time where we believed that MLS clubs had 0% chance of winning this tournament. They were going to get their they were going to get rocked, right? They were just going to get smoked. I don't feel that anymore. I believe that anytime a club from both leagues play each other, it could go either way, right? It just depends on who the better team is that day. But back in the day, Eric, we were seeing Club America smoking the Revolution or the Sounders 5-0 in a match sometimes. I mean, the doors were getting blown off, right? But that's not the case anymore. And that's good for both leagues, man. Iron sharpens iron. I believe for both leagues to reach their potential that they have to both be good. And Liga MX is probably hovering around top 10 league in the world, maybe 11. It's close, right? They're ahead of MLS right now as a league, but they could possibly get to the point where they're maybe top 7, top 8, with MLS getting better as well, because they're making each other better. The European leagues that we know so well, would they be as good as they are without each other competing with one another? Would the Brazilian league and the Argentine league be as good if they weren't competing and have that rivalry that's been built for over 100 years, where they're very passionate about not liking each other? So I kind of look at this in a different light nowadays. I would say I'm like a fringe Liga MX fan, because I know how important they are to the success of the league, and how much better they can make MLS, and how much we can make them better as well.
Yeah, now you've got young American players going to play down in Liga MX as well. You've got young Mexican players going up to play in MLS. It's definitely sort of a symbiotic relationship. Everybody is kind of benefiting at this point. So, obviously that's great. From the CONCACAF perspective, it's also great that this competition is suddenly more and more relevant, that, fans from both leagues are consistently tuning in, and that the result, as you said, is no longer a foregone conclusion that just, the Liga MX team is going to beat the MLS team every time. That's just not happening. I mean, I remember maybe 15, maybe 10 years ago, there were still Liga MX teams that were kind of fielding their under 23 side to face off in the first couple of rounds of CONCACAF against MLS teams. You just don't see that happen anymore for obvious reasons. The fact remains that we've had a very rapid evolution over the last 20 years with MLS, starting with David Beckham coming to Los Angeles in 2006, 2007. And after that, you go from 1 DP to 2 DPs to 3 DPs. I mean, we're clearly on a path where now certain teams or every team is going to be allowed at least to sign 4 or 5 designated players. You're going to see an increase in that salary cap if Apple's numbers are correct, and they are sort of attracting more subscribers. That revenue is getting passed on to the league. More sponsors come into play, more franchises come into play. San Diego FC is coming in 2025. I assume that they're going to make a big splash. We all know about Chucky Lozano and other guys that might come in. There's more competitive elements being drawn into MLS that are going to benefit the league internally, and in turn put pressure on Liga MX to maintain its dominance. And as you said, iron sharpens iron, because now Tigres and Monterrey and Club America and Chivas and maybe the top 6 in Liga MX, they're not just worried about beating each other. They're worried about going into international play and beating those MLS teams. And to me, like, the ultimate sign of respect is, I mean, can you tell me who a better player than Brandon Vasquez for Monterrey this season? I mean, I would argue that it was him and Sergio Canales, obviously, the Spanish midfielder. They were the two best players for that squad this entire season. And I mean, you talk about, again, 5, maybe 10 years ago, a club like that signing a young American striker, they would have gotten laughed at. I mean, that just didn't happen. So again, like, that just kind of goes to show that soccer in America, soccer in North America, is being benefited by the growth of MLS in general.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting to that I thought about with you saying that is we went through a period where MLS clubs were starting to target Liga MX players, very productive, like when Seattle signed Raul Ruidiaz back in 2018 because he had scored. I forgot which club it was he had played for in Liga MX, but he was pretty. Yeah, he was pretty efficient. I think he was scoring close to 20 goals throughout the calendar year for them, which is really good. And now, like you said, we're starting to see Liga MX dip into MLS and buy players like Brandon Vasquez, Cade Cowell, Georgios Giacomakis is reportedly being bought by Cruz Azul for $10 million in Atlanta United. So we're starting to see kind of go both ways where it's not just MLS being interested in Liga MX players. Liga MX is saying, hey, there's actually some good players in this league that we would be interested in that we think could contribute to our league and be effective. And I think that that's good. It's not just, getting talent from one pool. It's going back and forth now.
Yeah, as long as there's sort of familiarity between scouting departments on both sides of the border, you're going to see more of those players kind of go back and forth as they please, or as opportunities kind of arise for them. I mean, I think MLS has been really important for Liga MX in that a lot of European-based players and a lot of players who come from European countries in general, obviously started to come to MLS en masse over the last 15 years. And now you're seeing a sort of a familiarity with a lot of those players with Liga MX clubs as well that they would not have had if they were coming over directly from Europe. I mean, we didn't get a lot of Gignacs, a lot of Sergio Canales type signings in Liga MX in the first decade of this 21st century. That changed, and I think a lot of it had to do with what MLS started to do with their league, right? So now you've got players coming from Europe to North America, and a lot of those players are also taking the plunge and coming to Liga MX. And, you just mentioned it with Atlanta United and Cruz Azul cooking up a transfer. I mean, when was the last time Liga MX had a Greek player in its league? I would argue it's probably like either the first or the second time that happens. So that doesn't happen unless MLS exists, in my mind. So yeah, it's absolutely beneficial on both sides.
Yeah, and that's just what gets me excited about what we can possibly be. I truly believe that eventually we will be on equal playing field with the Argentine League and the Brazilian League. That's where we're heading. Maybe even exceeding that. Now, there's going to be some people who say, whoa, what are you talking about? You're not going to exceed those two leagues. But those are both selling leagues, Eric, whereas MLS and Liga MX are buying leagues, okay? So they could surpass that because we're different leagues, right? And if more players want to come here and they're willing to spend it, that's a whole different ball game to where they could possibly surpass them. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is the scheduling for this match. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with or aware, but MLS had games on at the same exact time as the Concacaf Champions Cup Final. And I just think that that's absolutely ridiculous because how do you have regular season matches on when your a club in your league is playing the biggest match in the region? How does that happen?
It's funny. I look at MLS sometimes, and you guys are doing stuff that Liga MX kind of outgrew 20 years ago that, Liga MX fans complained about at the time. That's one of those things. Like, we've seen in the past MLS and Liga MX not stop their tournaments for the World Cup or like Copa America or stuff like that, like really big deals where your national teams are competing. That's one thing, right? But what about, again, like, your club, your league rather, is being represented by this club in the most important match of the region. Clear your schedule for one day. I mean, it's fine. You can reschedule some of those matches or just kind of take that into account. knowing full well that you are now competing with Liga MX in a much more sort of balanced fashion than you were 5, 10 years ago. So, when MLS schedule makers are kind of figuring out, okay, so CONCACAF tells us that, the final for the Champions Cup is going to be played early June or late May. We're just going to clear that weekend. We're going to treat it like a FIFA international date and have teams play midweek in order to make that up. Now, there are other things you have to take into consideration, right? Apple has a seat at the table now for MLS. And if they're saying, hey, that game we don't really care about as much because, we have more games that are on our air at that time. We're going to give people the opportunity to choose. Like maybe, folks in Charlotte or in Nashville don't care about the Columbus Crew. Like maybe they just care about their local teams. Still, I think it's kind of a bad look. And again, we've had situations in Liga MX where that's happened. I remember big Copa Lib matches, now that you brought that up, in which Liga MX teams were playing, and we still had like these crummy league matches going on at the same time. But that's, they've outgrown that, right? MLS is going to outgrow that eventually. I think, Don Garber and folks in charge of operations in MLS need to come together with their broadcasting partner, in this case Apple, and say, hey, going forward, we need to do things a certain way, and let's figure out how you're not affected and obviously how we're not affected, because again, it's kind of a bad look.
No, it is, and hopefully my what I'm hopeful for is maybe that like someone like Apple might buy the rights to the Concacaf Champions Cup. That way, it is kind of like baked into the pie of like scheduling and saying, well, hey, listen, we got this big match. We don't want to step on it with other games. We want to make this our Super Bowl of the region, right? And I just think about, so obviously Messi draws a big crowd. There's a lot of people watching MLS because of him. He's playing at 7:30, Eric, and the game didn't actually kick off till 8, probably 7:45. How many? I would just, if I'm guessing, I would say there's probably maybe 40% less viewers didn't tune into the CONCACAF Champions Cup final because they're watching Messi, they're watching their club. So I would say the viewership was probably hurt, at least on the American side, because they might care about this game normally if it's the only thing on, but man, they're not going to pick watching that over their own club probably 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of those things where, again, you take into account the fact that Apple is the main broadcaster for the league, but they're not carrying the CONCACAF Champions Cup, so they have every incentive to say, we don't care about that, right? And we're just going to schedule the matches and go forward. Again, that's where the league comes in. That's where Don Garber and everybody else within that sort of the higher part of the org chart comes in and says, hey, we do care about this. This is a competition that we value, and we want to make a space for it and carve out some space within our calendar. And we want to do it in a way that doesn't affect you, our broadcasting partner, either. So at the end of the day, I should say, I know that I just talked about MLS kind of copying some things that we saw in Liga MX a few years ago. The fact that Apple has centralized rights for MLS is something that I think is going to happen in Liga MX in the very near future. 2025 is when most of the rights deals for, most of the 18 teams in Liga MX end. And we're going to see a situation in which Amazon is going to make a really strong push for centralized Liga MX rights. Obviously, Univision and Televisa down here, they're going to make a really strong push for centralized rights. You're going to see a number, I should say, of other companies come in and try to kind of drive up bidding, because Liga MX is such a good product as far as making money in North America, not just obviously in Mexico, but in the United States. Up until last year when the Premier League kind of overtook that top spot, whenever you looked at TV ratings in the United States, Liga MX was top dog, right? How does that help MLS in terms of what we're talking about? Well, I think that, now we're going to see, if, let's say, Televisa, Univision, they lose out on Liga MX's central rights package, then they have every incentive to go after CONCACAF, right? And that's a company that operates on both sides of the border, and, they can blow it up. You're talking about making this game our region's Super Bowl for soccer. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the good thing about these TV deals going into sort of centralized deals is the fact that it's going to, first of all, it's going to make it a lot easier for people to find stuff on TV or on streaming when they want to watch their favorite team. And second of all, it's going to force these companies to kind of, have their own corner, right? And kind of make these events as great as they want them to be. So, Leagues Cup, Concacaf, MLS, Liga MX, we're getting close to a very sort of exciting time for both of those leagues and all those competitions.
100%, man, 100%. And one thing I want to finish off with, and I thought a lot about this, and we talked a little bit about it earlier about it maybe making a difference. One other thing I'd like to see changed with the new format we see in CONCACAF Champions Cup is making the final in a neutral location. I think that this would be good for both teams. It would, you could do it wherever. It could be randomly drawn. They do that in every other major, Champions League in every other continent, as far as I know. I know they at least do it in Europe and they do it in South America. But I think that'd be cool to make it like a bigger event. Like, say that one year it's in Dallas. We know, Eric, it doesn't matter which Liga MX club makes it, they're going to get a crowd of fans at that stadium. And it's going to be probably easier for, some American side team, whichever it is, to make the journey as well. I'm sure that there would be some that would definitely come to Mexico, depending on where it's at as well. But I just think it'd be good for both leagues to have it in a neutral site and it be random each year and just kind of make it like the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is obviously, like, I think it's on a 6-year rotation between 6 different cities. But I mean, wouldn't that be cool as hell, man, to have the CONCACAF Champions Cup final at Cowboy Stadium and just have like a sold out arena of like maybe 100,000 fans and just really hype it up and promote it like it is the big deal it should be?
I mean, that's the UEFA Champions League model too, right? I mean, if you want to talk about soccer, I mean, we just had Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund at Wembley, which was a big deal, obviously, because fans will travel to support their teams. I mean, Mexican fans, as you said, will support their team anywhere in the United States. At this point in time, I think if something were to change, I don't like that it's, one match. I would much rather have it be two games, especially if we're talking about this being an alternating battle between MLS and Liga MX, right? I think that gives MLS teams a little bit more margin for error if they have one match assured at home, and then Liga MX, obviously, they've got a massive advantage whenever they play at home, wherever that might be. Having, I don't understand the logistics behind having Dallas and maybe SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles and MetLife in New Jersey rather, and Monterrey and Mexico City, but somebody's going to be upset, right, about that.
Probably, yeah.
I think at this point in time, this specific moment in history, the one argument that I would make against that is that, anything and everything in CONCACAF, and especially in North American football, is already geared towards the United States, right? Gold Cup every single time is in the U.S. Leagues Cup is in the U.S. You've got Mexico playing international friendlies right now. They're playing an international friendly, in Denver against Uruguay by the time we're recording this. So I would assume that, they're already pulling at that thread. And if they continue to do so, then there might be some backlash from fans, not just in Mexico. Let's just assume that a Canadian MLS team makes it. We haven't had a CONCACAF Champions Cup final anywhere in Canada for a very long time, right? So that's got to count for something as well. You're taking Central American teams out of the picture. If at one point like a Saprissa or any one of those teams makes it, the Caribbean. So I don't know. Like if I had to change the rule right now and ensure a more balanced tournament and more balanced result, kind of a higher degree of difficulty rather for Liga MX teams, then I would just make it home and away. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that down the road, if they want to make that tournament more profitable, they will definitely look at.
Yeah, I think that would be like the long-term goal, to get to that point where it is such a big event that no matter where it's hosted at, people are going to flock to it and make it feel like the big event it is. So yeah, hopefully, maybe they'll make some adjustments. Maybe go back to the two-leg format. That way, it gives each team, if one team's going to play at home, I would say it's fair that the other team also gets a game at home, just to make it even, right? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if maybe they make some adjustments. This is the first year of this new format that they've made since they renamed it to Concacaf Champions Cup, from Concacaf Champions Final. So yeah, or the Concacaf Champions League. They changed it to the Cup. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, man, what kind of changes they make, because this thing is ever evolving, right? It's always changing and doing different things and trying to be unique. So, but yeah, Eric, listen, man, I appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have you back on for Leagues Cup. It's obviously not going to be as exciting. I don't think it is, because there's asterisks next to this tournament now, and
Yeah.
especially if Liga MX ends up winning it, we're never going to hear the end of it.
Well, we can't undersell it though, right? I mean, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, more soccer is always good for us, and I think I mean, I'm going to make a prediction right now. I don't think a Liga MX team wins it this year either. I still think that the format is skewed, even though they made these changes from one year to the other. But yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on, and can't wait for next time.
Eric, where can people follow you at?
Yeah, let's go to X at Eric Gomez 86, and that's the same for TikTok.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, man. Thanks a lot.